You're listening to Love and Libido with me, your host, Dr. Emily Jamia. The goal of this podcast is to educate and inspire. My hope is that you will learn tools to create connection and cultivate passion, both within yourself and in your relationships. Here's what's coming up on today's episode. Have you ever wondered what exactly a certification in sex therapy entails? So it's not just a reading list, classes, and lectures. All AASECT certified sex therapists go through what's referred to as a sexual attitude reassessment, which in part involves watching a whole lot of porn of every variety in a group with our peers. We are going to talk about all of that. I'm also going to talk with my guest about the difference between sex coaching and sex therapy. Guess what? There is an option for people who want help without having to dive into their relationship with their mothers. Before we get into the rest of the show, I want to remind you to please rate and review the show. Sponsors need to see that you love the program, and we need sponsors to keep the program running. Thank you, everybody, for joining me today. I am joined by the legendary Dr. Patti Britton. Dr. Britton is a board-certified clinical sexologist who has been the leader of over 55 SARs, which we will talk about later. She's the author of the only sex and relationship training manual and world-renowned as the pioneer of the profession of sex coaching. She's the author of hundreds of articles, book chapters, forewords, and 5 major books in sexology. She's a popular speaker to consumers and a seasoned professional trainer for her peers. She's appeared on over 200 television shows and the featured guest on over 250 interviews for radio, podcasts, and media such as Cosmo, Men's Health, Women's Health, celebrity podcasts, and popular sex health-related websites. What hasn't she done? Dr. Patti believes that women and men have a divine birthright to experience their full erotic and sexual potential. You can connect with her via her website, drpattibritton.com, which will be linked in the description. So again, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. And before we jump in, I think it's really important to speak to your audience, those of you who are listening, who are in the field of human sexuality. SAR is such an important component and required by some of our certifying and professional training bodies, such as AASECT. And SAR is a sensitivity training for those of us who work with sexuality, with clients, with students, with research, however it is that we do that. And the book that you referenced is actually a SAR training manual, not a sex and relationship training manual.
A SAR training manual.
But I think it's an important segue into my passion for the work that I do, because I want to make sure that people who are working in this really complex space of our multi-layered experience as sexual beings are really sensitized to where their issues are, where their isms are, where their trigger points are. And so the SAR training manual is really a how-to book with also an international survey from the leading SAR training providers around the world. It also has the history and legacy of SAR and how it originated. SAR is one of my absolutely favorite programs to lead and to design and to take people through, because honestly, from the beginning of a SAR to the end of a SAR, you're not the same person.
SAR stands for Sexual Attitudes Reassessment. And yes. I'm sure I can speak for most sex therapists that you never forget your SAR. Can you talk a little bit about what happens during a SAR? Because I think it's important, not just for people who might be listening who are already in the field or thinking of joining the field, but just for the general public to know this really integral part of sex therapy training.
Well, SAR originated in the 1970s and really the beginning of the 1970s at the Institute for the Advanced Study of Human Sexuality. And that's my home school. That's the school that trained me and really where I earned not only my doctorate and my master's in public health and sexology, but I also had the privilege of being on the faculty for many years and became the dean of students for the last several years of its existence. It's gone now, which is so sad. But the founder was this visionary pioneer, Dr. Ted McElvenna, and this was really the beginning of the sexual revolution, right? So here we are in the sexual revolution. We've got this visionary pioneers wanting to make change and bring sexuality into the mainstream and help with healing around sexual issues. And he created this container where people would go through this kind of self-awareness. The arrow points at ourselves in a SAR, not at our clients or students. And it's really designed so that you're exposed to this immersion of media, explicit sexual imagery. And I'll never forget my first SAR at the Institute. We had 16 movies running at the same time on the big wall in the SAR room. 16. The human eye, connected to the human brain, can't analyze. You can't actually go into that analytical part of your brain. You're just sort of there and you're melting into how you feel. And it's really about our values, attitudes, and beliefs. But the other two pieces that are so important it's the lived experience of those who come and speak from that lived experience, whether they're a trans person, whether they're someone who's been in a wheelchair their whole life and yet experiences ecstatic sex, or there's somebody who is a tantrika, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the second part. And the third part is process. So there's group process. And, I always, when I run the SAR, and I actually have retired, I've trained my own A team who do them all around the world. And when I used to process the group, it was so interesting to hear people say, well, I've watched a lot of porn, but never in a group of strangers, some of whom I work with.
Yeah.
And then I would say, well, first of all, it's not all porn. And so let's deconstruct that. How does that make you feel? And so it's really about, as clinicians and helping professionals in sexuality, how do we feel, how comfortable a space or a relationship can I create for my client? And if I have issues or isms or blocks around certain behaviors or identities or whatever, then I can't really be of service to that person or those persons. So that's what SAR is. And I kind of miss it. I now that we're coming out of COVID, I'm like, maybe I could do a SAR.
Am I fully retired from that? What would you say you've led them for so long? What, if any, differences do you identify from doing them, like pre-porn, before people were exposed to a lot more, entering the field at that time versus people today?
Well, first of all, the 55 SARs were conducted from 2007 until 2019. We have to contextualize what technology was able to provide us. So people had the ability to look at porn at home. People had the ability to look at it on a smart device. But now porn is ubiquitous, unfortunately and fortunately. So we know that porn is an issue for young people who can gain access without really having the ability to process that. I have my own views and values about that. The world has opened up in so many ways from my perspective as a sexologist who's been in this field for over 40 years. There are changes I see in our speech. There are changes in our pronouns, for example. There are changes in how we view certain things like monogamy or consensual non-monogamy or polyamorous relationships, or where holistic really fits into the medical model, where diagnosis fits in with assessment when we think about the field that I've created, the profession of sex coaching, which is so different from therapy and mental health care, yet they're allied professions.
If you liked this video, drop me a like and subscribe below. Share with a friend who might find it interesting. You can also listen to this in podcast form anywhere podcasts are streamed by searching for Love and Libido with Dr. Emily Jamia. Finally, follow me across all social media channels at Dr. Emily Jamia for daily emotional and physical intimacy tips.